Hello, and welcome back to the third of our podcasts dealing with volumes that we published in the 2010. And I'm really pleased today to be moving to Cornwall and talking to Dr. Jo Mattingly, who edited the Stratton Churchwardens Accounts for our 2017 volume. And Jo's going to talk to us a bit today about Churchwardens Accounts and about her experience of editing that volume. So, hello, Jo.
Hello.
Jo's an expert on Cornwall. She's published many things on the history and landscape and archaeology of Cornwall, which is how you came to this project. But to kick off, could you tell us a bit about what are Churchwardens Accounts and what can they tell us as historians?
Churchwardens Accounts, they really start to survive from the 14th century, and they were an annual account which involved the two elected churchwardens, usually two, sometimes one, meeting with the parish in the church and accounting for what had been spent, mainly initially on church fabric, although, as we'll see with the Stratton accounts, the remit of a churchwarden's account could be very broad indeed.
So they can tell us a little bit about what the fabrics, the furnishings, how the church was run. Lots of kind of really interesting detail about parishes.
And the interesting thing is Cornwall is fairly well served by churchwardens accounts before 1570, but the best places for early churchwardens accounts are actually Middlesex and London, which rather goes against the grain. We think of the Great Fire of London wiping everything out, but they've got over a third of parishes in London preserve some sort of account before 1570. And of course, the other thing about churchwardens accounts, it's a very broad term. The accounts I'm going to be talking about were actually the High Cross accounts, which kind of morphed into the churchwardens accounts. And there were many other accounts for guilds, for stores, which were groups that maintained candles, and all overseen by the general receivers. So they're not always the same thing. You can have surprises. And it's, compared to manorial court records, I think churchwardens accounts haven't survived nearly as well.
Yeah, there are some very well-known sets, aren't there? But there aren't huge numbers of them.
Yeah.
So how did you come to the Stratton accounts and come to edit them?
Well, I was asked, I think, by Christine Edwards, if I could edit some churchwardens accounts, and I'd used
previous
them.
Trustee, wasn't she?
Yes, that's right. She said, "Oh, it'll make a good Devon and Cornwall volume. We need a Cornwall volume. We need something medievalish," and so I sort of had to think a little bit, because there are about, from Camborne up to Stratton and down to Bodmin, there are quite a few sets of churchwardens accounts. But I was drawn to Stratton because it covers the period 1535 to 1570 completely. There's not a year missing from the High Cross and then churchwardens accounts. And this is really rare. There are only 18 sets for the whole of the country that actually are complete for the Reformation. And I think it was one of them actually has a year missing, but we won't worry about that. So that was one attraction. The second attraction with Stratton was that the accounts are in English. And I have done work on manorial accounts, which are all in Latin, but it's quite nice just to sort of focus on not having to translate as well as do the paleography, the handwriting. And the other thing about the Stratton accounts is that they're in London, so they're not very accessible. A microfilm was available in Cornwall, but that's it's not a very interactive way of working. And I decided that another advantage was that the general receivers' accounts had survived in London and a second set in Cornwall covering part of the same period. So there was a chance to use two sets of accounts, the overall general receivers and the accounts for the church.
You can get a really kind of rounded picture of what's happening in this one parish as you go through the Reformation, which is one of the things historians have often wanted to do with Churchwardens accounts, is kind of work out what happens with the Reformation on the ground. And Stratton sounds like it's a really great opportunity to do that.
Yeah. And the other fantastic thing was, because of court cases about disputed church lands, which went on for years and years, there is a huge archive of other material which explains things in the accounts, including riding to London about the Chantry lands in 1554 to 5, because a mistake was made and they were said to belong to the Churchwardens, when in fact they'd been enfeoffed, or that meant that a number of individuals had been given the responsibility for them, and they were thus exempt from being confiscated.
Yeah, so you see these kind of interactions. Although it's a small place in North Cornwall, it's not isolated. They're going to London, they know where to go to kind of get their business done.
I think I worked out that it's probably the 15th wealthiest parish in Cornwall in the 1540s.
Oh, wow, so substantial.
So it's not, it's got a port, it's got a major market, and it's a substantial place.
Yeah. So was there anything that surprised you working on them? Anything you didn't expect to find or that really struck you?
Well, the court case about going to London to argue for the Chantry lands when Catholicism was back was a great surprise. But Philip and Mary I, were very keen to get revenue, and they weren't keen to refound chantries. Another surprise was that I found really good evidence in the accounts of the founding of the market at Stratton. It was a bare place, a rather sort of nasty place near the church. The church house was built in about 1515 to 16, and the market was certainly going by 1517. And that's all chronicled in the Churchwardens accounts, not perhaps where you would expect to find things, but of course, the church house, which was where the church ales were brewed and where the Whitsunday feasts were held, and wedding feasts for local gentry and wakes after funerals, that had the right to have stalls outside, and so it came within the church's remit.
Yes, and we sometimes forget now that, in the Middle Ages, before the Reformation and after, parish churches were responsible for all kinds of things now that we wouldn't think of like that, weren't they?
Absolutely. And another thing I found, and I think this was in the general receivers' accounts, was the names of the men who put up the scaffold. And using other bits of information, we worked out this was the scaffold for Simon Morton, vicar of Poundstock. And they erected it around the market cross, which was only about 3 years old at the time. We actually, in the Churchwardens accounts, we have the account of building the market cross. And it took 2 weeks and 4 days to build, and we know who built it. And it only lasted about 30 years. But the scaffold was erected around the cross, and poor old Simon Morton was left to hang there for 6 days.
What has he done?
As an example, he was an arch rebel. They sang ballads about him in London. He was so notorious.
Wow.
So a real Catholic in a neighbouring parish.
Yeah, so you can see as the accounts go through all these different changes that happen. It goes Protestantism to more extreme Protestantism to Catholicism, back to Protestantism, and you can see this being tracked in this local community.
And the other thing is the local gentry, the gentry of Morwenstow, and the local gentry all become involved in profiteering from the Reformation. So who are the people buying the pieces of velvet from the vestments? Probably vestments that they gave, but the Arundel family. And you can see how the Reformation happened by stealth. First, you get the gentry on board by letting them have favourable leases. So they took a lease of the rectory of Stratton from Launceston Priory. And then they're very implicated in the Reformation. And the next step is they start to confiscate things. And even the angels from the roof, the cherubim, are sold off. And it's very often the gentry buying things up, probably to make nice cushions for their, chairs. And it is very much a parish with resident gentry. First the Arundels, then the Chamonds, through a marriage of one of the Arundels.
Yeah, and they're able to reuse all these valuable things that have been given to the church over many years in some cases.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing about the accounts is they change in nature as things go on. And you can see the evolution of the parish as an administrative unit coming out of the Churchwardens Accounts, because they start to deal by 1557, when the General Receiver's Accounts resume, they start to reveal payments to the poor, shifts, shoes, shrouds, all that sort of stuff is being provided. And you get these sort of anonymous people like the poor tinker's maid who is given a shroud. And so you get this idea of quite a mobile population coming through Stratton. And Stratton is also the place to come to for your passport, for begging. So there's quite a lot of people obviously targeting Stratton. And also travelling entertainers like gypsies, and they're described as the Egyptians, and they come 4 times in the 1520s, and then 1559 to 61 they come 3 years running, and they hire out the church house. And they're probably doing bareback riding around the marketplace, playing music, telling fortunes, and no doubt picking pockets, because that's how they're depicted in Bruegel paintings. But they're welcome.
Providing entertainment as well.
Exactly. And, the gentry can spare a bit. They're the only ones with purses.
Yeah. Was there anything, so there's lots of kind of brilliant detail in here. Was there anything you found challenging about editing these or working on them?
Yes, I thought English, easy. And Catherine, you very kindly helped me with the Latin headings so that we got them accurate. But what I hadn't expected was 35 scribes.
35, goodness me.
And the General Receiver's Accounts, it was about 5 or 6, and they could afford to employ the same person for a run of time. But with the High Cross or Churchwardens Accounts, the problem was that one of the 2 churchwardens had to write up the account. And it wasn't just the handwriting. It was also the fact that the spellings changed. So the same word could be spelt in very outlandish ways.
Yeah.
Really, and there was one hand that was particularly awful. And it raises the question about education. Stratton is near to Week St Mary, which had an established school, which was closed at the Reformation, or it had been moved to Launceston, but so there was a sort of educational establishment nearby. There was also a school in the church house in the late 1550s, which was fairly normal. It was a normal use of the upper room. And I think it would make a wonderful study for someone to sort of actually try and trace the different styles and whether any of them can be, linked to Week St Mary.
That would be interesting, wouldn't it?
And it was way beyond the scope of my study, but it did cause major problems. And I think there was only one bit that David Thomas, late retired archivist at Crescent Kerno, and I just couldn't read, but we knew the sense of it. So they were readable, but it was pretty hard going sometimes. One had to take a step back, deep breath, have a cup of coffee, try again. And the fortunate thing is, because there's repetition, you could eventually work it out.
Yeah.
But I think
if they're kind of formulaic.
That was the hardest thing, really.
Yeah, and it's a real challenge for pre-modern documents generally, isn't it? Not everybody has lovely handwriting. And in fact, as you get into the early modern period and more people can read and write, you get all the kind of non-professional scribes coming in too, who sometimes have much worse handwriting. But it means you've done us a wonderful service in actually transcribing and editing these things.
Yeah.
So I think, well, we've got a good sense of the volume. I'll remind everyone you can buy all of our backlist volumes through Boyd Allen Brewer. And you can see Joe in many places around Cornwall giving talks as well. But thank you ever so much, Joe. And I'll leave you to get back to this very, very sunny day. We're in the middle of the heat wave, aren't we, this week? And you have, you have the book, brilliant.
Yeah, I have the book here. And it's really a fascinating social study. And it's very comparable to Morbath in Devon, which was a much poorer parish. And I think we need to have, there are still quite a few of the 18 that haven't been properly transcribed and edited. What had been published before was cherry-picked extracts out of context, and not always absolutely correct as well. Yeah, so hopefully it's an interesting read.
Yeah, it is. I can vouch for that. And there's projects there for anyone else who's into Churchwardens Accounts and wants to edit some other ones. But thank you very much, Joe. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.